to reflect. How can you respond nonviolently to people and to people in your life so that you can really widen your heart to really practice greater love, compassion, to outdoing one another in kindness, and really working on these smaller moments in the day-to-day so that we can really grow and deepen in our spiritual lives in nonviolence and really be people who have really wide hearts of universal love. That's what we need. And we have to widen this to all creatures from now on and really figure out how can be nonviolent to creatures and all of creation. And this is what you're doing, and I want to encourage you. At the same time, to continue to be part of the global grassroots movement. Things are happening. The world is moving. It's bad, but there's so much good happening. 85 nonviolent revolutions the last 30 years. You think about it. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the people power movement, the end of apartheid, Lima Gaboe in Liberia. You all know her, I hope. Maybe the greatest living peacemaker. She won the Nobel Peace Prize a couple of years ago. Liberia, Charles Taylor, 200,000 people massacred. She just said, I call upon all the women to dress in white and let's sit down on the streets and say enough is enough. And he just left. You just can't work with these women. That's powerful, active nonviolence and getting rid of the dictatorship and ending the war. And they're still at it. That's happening around the planet. At least 2/3, maybe more of the planet is personally involved in grassroots movements for justice. And you're in Seattle. This is an important place. You can't give up. I know a lot of you are working. Everybody's got to be involved. I love what Romero said. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. What we call campaign nonviolence. I invite you, if you're wondering what to do, or to get involved if you'd like. We're just trying to take nonviolence into the mainstreams and do nonviolence trainings all over the country. And we're leading up to this fall. We're calling for 300 demonstrations around the country, beginning September 21st, International Peace Day, up to the congressional elections, based on the Declaration of Peace, which we did 6 years ago. And we're asking everybody to go to your local federal building or congressional office and do a march or a sit-in, some public witness against war, a lot of people working on the drones, and or poverty. Can take immigration or prison reform or the death penalty or global hunger or the fast going on in Tacoma about Gitmo and so forth and so on, or third and or the environment. And we're going to try to make the connections between all the movements and re-energize the movement. And if you want to get more information, just look up Campaign Nonviolence. But I just encourage you to keep at it. This is how change happens through grassroots, bottom-up movement building. And I think Jesus was a nonviolent organizer. He was a movement builder. Gandhi says he was the most active person of nonviolence who ever lived. And then poor Gandhi goes on to say, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. And Gandhi says the Sermon on the Mount is the most it's the greatest teachings of nonviolence in all of human literature. He read the Sermon on the Mount, parts of it, every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life. And he's not a Christian. He's saying, this is my handbook, how to be a human being in a world of total violence. I invite you to do that. And you read the teachings, and there it is. Blessed are the peacemakers. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Be as compassionate as God. Love your neighbor. Love even your enemies. But you could see in Luke chapter 9, he turns and he starts, Jesus, marching toward Jerusalem. Like Gandhi on the Salt March or Dr. King in Birmingham. He's a movement builder. He sends people ahead of him in pairs to proclaim peace and heal everybody and expel the demons of war and empire and say, the reign of God, the new world of nonviolence is coming. And it's so spectacular because he walks into the temple where the religious authorities are working with the empire to oppress all the people and steal their money. And he turns over the tables of the money changers. And he prevents people from coming and going. He does a sit-in. And he's peaceful, nonviolent, doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any nuclear bombs. But wow, is he not passive. He's active, public, and daring, troublemaking, and revolutionary. You know, it's illegal activity on behalf of justice in the name of the God of peace. I've come to the conclusion that everything Jesus did was illegal. He was a one-man crime wave walking through the Roman Empire. So I was talking about this, and forgive me if you heard these before. This is, I still think, the best I can share with you. And when the war in Iraq started again in 2003, I was speaking to a church, and this woman raised her hand, and she said, you know, I just think this is the most beautiful stuff. Nonviolence, that's so interesting to think about. And me, personally, I'm a big fan of peace. But sometimes you just got to kill somebody. In New Mexico, everybody talks like that. You know, and she said, the church is right to throw out the Sermon on the Mount. In the year 315, when Constantine theoretically became Christian and said you can all kill now and join this army, support the empire, and he turned to Cicero, the pagan, to begin to come up with the just war theory that ended up having the 7 conditions, and then you can bomb everybody for Jesus, and crusades, and it's all Christians building the nuclear weapons at Los Alamos. And I said to her, and I invite you to think about this for those of you who are Christian, what happens next in the story? You know, he's in the upper room, the Passover meal. He takes the bread and the cup. My body broken for you, my blood shed for you. If he were a good American, he would say, go break their bodies for me. Go shed their blood for me. No, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. Do this. That's the art of nonviolence, the willingness to give our lives for suffering humanity. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible soldiers to arrest him. Peter's thinking, oh my God, our guy's in trouble. I'm supposed to be the number one in charge. I got to protect him. And he gets a sword to kill because he's thinking, if there's ever a just war in all of human history, if violence is ever divinely sanctioned in all of human history, if there was ever a moment to kill, this is it, in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's right. We got to kill to protect our guy. And just as he goes to kill to save Jesus, the commandment comes down, put down the sword. Friends, those are the last words of Jesus to the church. It's the last thing he said to the men and women, his friends around him. And it's the first time they understood who he is. Peter's going, oh my God, this hippie is so into agape and peace and nonviolence. He's not going to defend himself violently, which means we don't get to defend ourselves violently, which means we're out of here. And they all abandon him and go, I always say, go read Gandhi. Gandhi's our greatest Christian theologian, as Martin Luther King said. Jesus goes deeper into nonviolence because he's working every moment for Jesus is like civil disobedience, in-your-face violence. There's no anger, no resentment, no retaliation. Violence stops here in my body. You're all forgiven, but the days of killing are over. And God raised from the dead, and he says, peace be with you. Now you walk the road of nonviolence. It's so fantastic. This is what you and I are trying to do. To be people of active, daring, gospel nonviolence in a world now of total violence. This is the greatest thing we can do with our lives. This is the great hope of the world. Gandhi and King and Dorothy Day were right. For us, especially as Christians, this is the way we can follow Jesus. To be meticulously nonviolent to ourselves. Nonviolence in all our relationships, to all creatures, on all of creation. And to be part of building a new movement. To be heralding a new world without war and poverty and violence, to welcome God's reign of peace and nonviolence, to fulfill your vocations, to be who you already are in the eyes of the God of peace. Peacemakers, the beloved daughters and sons of the God of peace. Thanks very much for listening to me, everybody. yours. Thank you.
Just a brief question. I couldn't help but wonder regarding your second category of our relationships with other people and other parts of creation. Are you a vegetarian, or what do you say about eating meat?
You read Gandhi, and he started out that way. What happened to me was in 1982, when I came back from Israel, a week later, was grappling with this. I was reading all these books, and one of them was Frances Moore Lepay's Diet for a Small Planet, one of the most important books. And she says, do it for human beings. Well, that's shocking. Do we eat animals? You kill and torture animals? How could that be? Gandhi said the measure of your humanity is the way you treat animals. It's a powerful statement. She said, though, in Brazil, all the grain that's growing there, with people starving, is being shipped to the United States to feed the cattle for McDonald's. Therefore, don't eat meat to help end world hunger. And now the United Nations says, forget that. It has to do with the environment. It's all about saving, so it's all one. So I became a vegetarian in 1882.
Yes, I just want to, I told my daughter, carve on my gravestone, nice is not enough. Based on what you said earlier, nice doesn't quite cut it. You got to be active. So, but my question is a question that is I've been asking and exploring for 30 years. And it's a great mystery, but I'm looking for a definitive answer, so I hope you can do that tonight, right? But, when Jesus, the military leader who comes up to him who has his ill servant,
yeah.
So he's participating in the oppression of the Jews.
Yeah.
He's ready to kill any numbers of people who rebel.
Right.
And Jesus said, there's no faith like this in Israel.
Yeah.
I just want your reflections on that.
This is great. Was Gandhi right or not? Was Jesus violent or nonviolent? I sometimes think, well, if he's violent, the heck with him. If Gandhi's right and Dr. King is right, now we're getting somewhere. We're just inventing a theology and a spirituality of nonviolence, which is just a clumsy word for love and peace and compassion, but it means no killing and all. It's so darn exciting, and I keep investigating it, and with some friends who are here tonight, we keep talking about it. But this is good. I love your question, and I invite you to keep going back to the stories. My text and my advice is just read the 4 Gospels for the next 30 years, and then get back to me. It's the most profound story of nonviolence in all of human writing. Okay. The disciples come and say, this guy, the Roman, he built the synagogue. He's really rich. He's really nice. And his servant is ill, and you should help him. You really should do this. And Jesus is like, okay, I'll do it. And he goes there, and the word comes, I'm a military person. I give the word, and it's done. You're not worthy to have you under my house. Just say the word, and the servant will be healed. And Jesus turns and said, I've never encountered this faith in all of Israel. Now, those of you who are scripture scholars know more about this from me. He doesn't say, therefore, I was completely wrong, and the Roman Empire is great, and let's all be good Roman citizens. Which is what I hear a lot of people saying from this one story. He's just saying the guy has faith, and he cured the servant's illness. And then he was executed by the Roman Empire. He was surrounded by 600 drunken Roman soldiers, the whole cohort. And after he was arrested and tried, remember they mocked him and put the purple robe on him. That's what empire does. It tortures and executes activists to make sure the rest of you don't get involved in this. And Jesus is misunderstood as a violent revolutionary. He did the right thing. He was affirming faith. Faith is really the heart of everything for Jesus, and we don't know what he's talking about. Do you really believe in God or not? Do you really believe in Jesus or not? If you really believe in God, what are we afraid of? let's go do great miracles and change the world as instruments of God. You can do it. We have, Gandhi shows that. But he never supported Rome or the Roman Empire or the oppression and the killing that was happening throughout the outskirts of the empire in Palestine and Galilee. I don't see any of that, and I think that story is misused a lot. That's my humble take on it. I invite you to wrestle with it too. Thanks.
I don't want to embarrass you, but I was Jesuitical since first grade when I put AMDG on my papers through a Jesuit university, and our Jesuit pastor this minute who says hello to you and likes you. But I would like to know, after St. Ignatius's order for 4 centuries has done so much good, how your provincial in Baltimore could kick you out, and that the current Pope in Rome or the Vatican could kick you out. It's, to me, a mystery of all mysteries.
These are deep mysteries. Jesuit mysteries. No, thank you. Well, first of all, I left. So I was a Jesuit for 32 years, and some of you know this and some of you don't, and I'm talking about it. I've gone public with that. Every provincial I had, except for maybe one, just 30 people, has been trying to get rid of me for 32 years. From the week I entered, they were on to me. And it's so, I'm hesitate to talk about it because it's too painful. It's not funny what I'm sharing with you, so I ask you to respect me. This is a very personal journey. The community I love, the martyrs I knew, my teacher, Daniel Berrigan, we're all suffering through what's happened to me and to others. And I can let other Jesuits speak for themselves. I'll just say, that's my history, which you wouldn't believe. I've written it up and people didn't believe it. My friends read it. I never talked about it publicly. The things that happened to me, you wouldn't believe it. But in these last 10 years, as I've spoken to a lot of people around the country and around the world, you know, I'm banned and kicked out of 100 dioceses or 200 by many, many bishops. So they're inundating my provincial and other provincials with complaints because of the scandal that I'm against war. And so what happened was I was working in New Mexico having these peace vigils at Los Alamos, and the Archbishop removed my priestly faculties because I was having sackcloth and ashes peace vigils there, which were getting enormous publicity in the state. And he could have lost millions of dollars, you know, because the priest is up there saying, you can't be Christian and work at Los Alamos. By the way, I went in to meet him and he said, yeah, we need nuclear weapons. I said, the church is actually against nuclear weapons, Archbishop. It's actually pretty clear, I think. No, there are only security. And I said, no, actually, in the Psalms, it says God is our security. No, God can't protect us. I almost said to him, being a smart aleck, okay, you don't believe in God. Yeah, I didn't say that. And I said, well, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies. And you and I have to help the 20,000 Christians at Los Alamos not be spending their lives preparing to vaporize people. No, you don't have to do what Jesus said. Yeah, and that was a real life-changing moment for me. I got kicked out. The provincial ordered me to Baltimore, where the headquarters is. I'm not allowed anywhere else on the whole planet, he said. I was not given an assignment. I was basically put under house arrest, which is an old Jesuit thing. And no, seriously, they used to have prisons in the old days, you know. And, you know, he said to me, you know, as I've heard every year, why are you in the order? You know, nobody supports you. Why don't you leave? He said to me, you will leave after 3 years. So why don't you just leave now? And it's so, people say, but your vow of obedience. Well, it's weird when you have your superior saying, leave under obedience. And he can't get rid of me because I'm an elder in the order with final vows. I'm a priest in good standing, but it was affecting my health. And I thought, what should I do? And then it wasn't a choice for me. And so I moved out of Baltimore and was later dismissed. So it was my choice to leave. And I'm hoping to stay a priest, and I'm working with a bishop in California at the moment who wants me to continue my work. So please keep me in your prayers, and the society, that we can all live up to these questions about what does it mean to follow Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you. I really honor your path, what you've done. You talked about middle of September, you'd like us all to be engaged in activism.
Yes.
Are you familiar with, I'm sure you are, the project of David Swanson, David Hartsoe, Paul Chappell?
Yes.
World Beyond War.
Tell us about it.
Could you speak about it?
You say a word about it. Tell us
Okay, that's what I came up to do, to tell everybody, but I thought you would do it for me.
It's really terrific, and I hope everyone will be part of it. We have to support every good cause in the world, and these are friends of mine, and it's a great vision. So go on.
I think it's the most exciting activism that I've heard about recently. It's a project to abolish war. Not this one or that one or that one, but all war. And David Swanson has a website, davidswanson.org, where you can download his book, War No More, for $2. I'll lend you the $2 if you need, okay? And the website that he and the others are encouraging people to look at, to sign up, to put your name on, is called worldbeyondwar.org. I think I got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I encourage people to do that.
It's great, and we're working closely with them with campaignonviolence.org, and it's the same kind of thing. Can I reflect with you for a minute on that?
Absolutely.
Because you go, well, that's just ridiculous. Beyond war. I don't know if you know who's the great, well, Tony just died last week, a great activist in England, but who's the great Christian peace activist in England these many last decades? The Berrigan of England is Bruce Kent, and he started a group like that years ago, and he's been working there. And I used to think about that a lot. And then I came to the conclusion, and I was reading Arundhati Roy, who's a really great thinker, and helps us to reflect on what is it we're going through. That one of the great casualties of the culture of war is the loss of the imagination. This is very important, because you could look at Jesus and say, what an imagination. Or you think of the imagination of God. These are deep things. This is good. And then I got thinking, the abolitionists. Now these people are totally ridiculous, and what an imagination they had as activists to come forward and say, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. I mean, that's just total lunacy. And they had their lives threatened, their homes burned down, they lost their jobs, and they said, no, a new world of equality is coming. And they lifted up a vision that people began to organize around. We have to stand on their shoulders and claim them as our ancestors, and our job is even bigger. And this is what David Hartsoe and I talk about all the time, because what we are doing is standing up and saying, we are announcing the abolition of war. And poverty and hunger and nuclear weapons and torture and executions and catastrophic climate change and all violence. And you try saying that publicly sometime. People think you're totally nuts, and you go, no, a new world of nonviolence is coming. To translate that into the ancient Koine Greek, the reign of God is at hand. This is what we are doing. We have to help people in Seattle reclaim your imagination, or talk about a day when there is no more Trident submarine base. And people wouldn't have to be fasting and protest at the prison. And all the other injustices going on in Seattle and Washington. A new kind of nonviolent Seattle, but a nonviolent nation and a nonviolent world. And it will only happen through grassroots movement building, which is why I support World Beyond War and Campaign Nonviolence and all your own projects. I just encourage you. Thank you.
Could I reflect with you something that inspires about how we ended slavery? And it's this wonderful book, Bury the Chains. What economically is impossible, and within, 30, 40 years, it happened without a war before we did.
The Quakers, but they were activists, and they were organized, and they were totally committed.
Right.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of Howard Zinn, the great historian, the author of A People's History of the United States. And he was in Santa Fe shortly before he died, and he was saying, you think of it, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, he says to me, they all have one thing in common. From the beginning, the middle, to the very end, they were all hopeless. And then there was a breakthrough. And Howard Zinn said, why? We know now historically in our own national history, the great Howard Zinn said, because in every movement, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, ordinary people did one or two or three things for their cause, for the struggle for justice and peace, every single day, even though they knew they weren't going to live to see the victory they were giving their lives for. They kept at it anyway. That's when nonviolence is contagious, and it's going to work. It's the power of God. That's why you and I have to keep at this, and why it's good to reflect on the abolitionists and this history.
I have the impression that people are very afraid to be arrested over here, and I'm curious why, or how can we overcome that fear? And the second thing is there really a stigma if you're arrested after you're released? Are you stigmatized?
It depends, certainly, yeah, with some people. Well, first of all, the question of fear is so important. I mean, Gandhi says you cannot practice nonviolence and be afraid. So he professed a vow of nonviolence and a vow of fearlessness. The one thing in the four Gospels that's repeated the most is, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. And what if we just said, okay, I'll take him at his word? Well, that's really something. Then you have to practice and be doing your work. I was reflecting today on, what are we afraid of? And I do a lot of journaling. I used to do that. I mean, I still journal, but about my fears. To work at it. I'm afraid of public speaking. I still am. I have a book. There was a Gallup poll that came out 10 years ago about the fears, greatest fears that Americans have. Number 1 was public speaking. Number 2 was death. It's true. I'm afraid of flying, and afraid of this person and that person, and to try to process it and work it through, and if especially death. And that's when you get into, do you believe in God or not? And God, and as a Christians, I believe our survival is already guaranteed. Resurrection means no more death, no more violence. We don't cooperate with death. That's why I like the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, who said, I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. Amen. So to get over our fears, and so for me that meant working in soup kitchens and going to prisons and working in homeless shelters and going to war zones, and it helped to be in El Salvador.